Hey guys, good morning. Ooh, is that a little bit too loud? Okay. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so excited to be here with you guys talking about this and other things. I just want to give you guys a little personal background. So I've never suffered from imposter syndrome, ever. Actually, that's a lie. Okay, now that we have that out of the way. So I'm a recovering imposter syndrome-aholic, if that's a word, whatever it's called. For most of my life, I suffered from something called imposter syndrome, like a lot of people. There were also times when I just didn't know what the hell I was doing, but that was different. So there's a difference between the two. So I consider myself now to be kind of in a place of recovery. I still don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time, but for the things that I'm doing well, my perception of success is much more in line with the external perception and measurement of people around me. And whether or not my perception is accurate, I take sincere pride in my work now, which I never used to do before. So funny story, I was talking to the lead of the committee after I submitted a bunch of talks for this conference on, test automation strategies, agile team development, continuous integration, et cetera, et cetera. And I just decided to submit this particular talk, even though I felt like it probably wasn't relevant, just because I had the content ready, just because I was feeling crazy. And apparently, almost everyone on the committee was like, that's the talk that we need, that one. So a lot of people, I think, feel this way here. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for making this possible, for the courage and honesty that it takes for us to talk about these at technical conferences, these sorts of things. So we're here, we're experts in our field, and many of us feel that we're frauds. So what is imposter syndrome, for those who don't know? So in the words of Mike Meyer, I still believe that at any time, the no-talent police will come and arrest me. I don't know how Dana Carvey feels, but I just like this picture, so. Mike Meyer definitely has this issue, and he's one of the most successful actors in the world. Jodie Foster says this on imposter syndrome: I thought it was a fluke when she was accepting the Oscar, I think. It was the same way when I walked on the campus at Yale. She attended Yale. I thought everybody would find out and they'd take the Oscar back. They'd come to my house, knock on the door, excuse me, we meant to give that to someone else. This is what she actually believed. So imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon in which people are unable to internalize their accomplishments. Here's the full definition. Despite external evidence of their competence, those with the syndrome remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve the success they have achieved. Proof of success is dismissed as luck, timing, or as a result of deceiving others into thinking that they're more intelligent or competent than they believe themselves to be. Notably, imposter syndrome is particularly common among high-achieving women. So I was doing research on this topic because I wanted to present a well-researched talk to you guys. And I want the talk to be mostly positive and focused on techniques that you can use to deal with this and get over it. But I just want to take a second and sort of feel a little bit sad at how incredibly pervasive this is for people. Apparently, 2 out of 5 successful people feel this way, and potentially up to 70% of all people feel like imposters. And that's totally crazy. We have to do something about this. I can deal with my own imposter syndrome, but not the idea that 70% of all people also feel this way. It's just not cool. The other thing is, typically, the more you succeed, the more you feel it, which is even more messed up. We really just need to end this now. And I think it's actually highly linked to kind of this movement that Sheryl Sandberg has been driving, which is essentially asking people to lean in. Oftentimes, I think, a majority of time, I think people are not doing that because they have this imposter syndrome feeling. Here's another famous case. This person is basically an icon in American history. She was an author, poet, dancer, actor, singer, writer, director, producer. She wrote prolific amounts of books. She's gotten 50 honorary degrees. She was active in the civil rights movement. She did like 80 lectures a year up until her old age. And this is what Maya Angelou has to say on imposter syndrome. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out. And this is so tragic when you think about it, because that she had to suffer with this feeling through her tremendous career, like needlessly, right? This is another example which may be slightly tangential. This person was perhaps like the most well-respected thinker of his day. His name is generally equated with genius. He developed the theory of relativity. And in his kind of last days before he died, he said, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." So he may or may not have felt imposter syndrome, but he definitely had a sense that the perception that people had, or kind of the esteem that people had of him, was not correct. So many people suffer from this. It's very, very common with women and with underrepresented groups in general, and it's very prevalent in the technology fields, among other things. Here's a few funny quotes I found online from technologists. I've got 30 domains, and I've only done something awesome with 3 of them. Sometimes when I log into my DNS manager, I just see 27 failures. I think to myself, there's 27 potential businesses, 27 potential cool open source projects just languishing. If you knew anything, you'd have made those happen. I hit 0 email a week ago. Now I'm at 122 today in my inbox, and it's stressing me out. And I teach people how to manage their inboxes. These are like examples of people who feel like frauds, right? I started a new job where I've been doing a lot of work in a language I'm rusty in, and all the woot I've been doing 10 years worth of language doesn't mean jack. I'm a fraud. I feel like an imposter quite often, especially on sites like Stack Overflow. It can be pretty intimidating and demotivating at times, getting started in open source as well. And Tina Fey kind of makes this link that I think is sort of important, actually, between ego and imposter syndrome. So for her, she sort of calls this out and says, the beauty of imposter syndrome is you vacillate between extreme egomania and a complete feeling of, I'm a fraud, oh God, they're on to me. So you're just trying to ride the egomania when it comes and enjoy it, and then slide through the idea of fraud. And this may not be true for everybody, but it was certainly true for me in my case. Like, there was definitely a link between ego and imposter syndrome. And kind of the way it started for me was, I was told as a child that I was gifted and talented, which was like a common thing that parents did in the 80s, and it, I think, is known to be a mistake now mostly. And the way I internalized that, like at around age 8 or whatever, was that, not that I did valuable things, but that I was valuable. And so what that meant was that my success was due to my innate characteristics and not my actions. And so translation for my 8-year-old mind was that any failure would mean that I'm not valuable. And so I could not fail. So that was my brilliant conclusion. So I basically wasn't allowed to fail in my own perception. And of course I did fail anyway. And so then I developed this other brilliant strategy for dealing with that, which was that I would intentionally try less. Because if I failed, then I could blame it on my lack of effort. And it wouldn't be because I was a person with no value. It would be because I just hadn't really put that much effort into it. And so I developed a pattern in childhood and also as a teenager and also as an adult where I intentionally aimed low. And I basically focused on things that I was sure I could do perfectly. This is like the opposite of leaning in. And I think this is a lot of what women do and other people. So I'd give about 60% of my effort to most of my endeavors because I always had this handy excuse that I could use that would basically not question kind of my value as a person. And then the things that I did achieve, like I was never proud of, probably for this very reason, right? Because I really hadn't given it my all. So I'm a female software engineer, and I was the only woman in my engineering classes and in many of the jobs after college, which is no longer true and awesome. Things have definitely changed. But even then, like, I was never treated badly because of my gender, actually. The opposite. People went out of their way to help me. I had lots of mentors and bosses who gave me opportunity and support, guidance, reassurance, the benefit of the doubt. Nobody held me back. In fact, they actually kind of maybe gave me an extra boost, but I held myself back. And I regularly told myself that I wasn't good enough, that I was lazy, that I had no talent. But I still managed to succeed, probably because of a lot of the external support that I got from people around me. So a few years ago, I decided to do a test, try something a little bit different, as I was trying to cultivate kind of my inner life a little bit more. And so basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to take a project that I wasn't sure I could do, like really wasn't sure I could do, very likely couldn't do. And I wanted to try my hardest to do it and basically commit 100% of what I could do to this task, to this project. And I just kind of wanted to see what would happen, because I'd never really done this before. And so the project itself was actually really important for the company that I was working for, and it had a huge impact across the entire organization. And it was kind of this elephant in the room, like no one wanted to touch it because it was considered to be basically too hard. So I decided to give 100%, and I wrote down like the goals that I wanted to achieve for this project, and I like visualized like the end goal happening. I worked around the clock. I worked from like 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. to actually do like focused coding and technical work because my days were filled with meetings and emails and stuff like that. I couldn't actually work. And I basically gave everything that I could to this project such that if it failed, it wouldn't be because I didn't try. Sort of like what Jason was saying, actually, yesterday, as far as the Sauce Labs kind of company shutdown fear. If the project was going to fail, it wasn't going to be because I hadn't given everything that I could to it. So it was very challenging. It was both technically and politically challenging. There were many meetings, backroom deals, engineering deep dives, use case reports, executive presentations, team and organizational level brown bags and walkthroughs. It involved deeply disparate and unaligned organizations, including security, networking, infrastructure, IT, procurement, legal, and of course development. But it wasn't just one part of development, it was all of development, including mobile, desktop, native, web, for all of the programming languages that you could think of. And it had to support the most recent OS X, Windows, and Linux platforms, just as a bonus. It was really hard. So basically, I endeavored to work on this project, and it was extremely tough. There was a lot of pain and suffering involved, but I kept doing it. And miraculously, we actually got an initial prototype working in record time in 3 months, which was totally unprecedented and historic at the company. No one believed this was possible. 2 months later, we actually got an alpha going, which was again just almost unbelievable. And though we were behind schedule, we finally got a beta testing. We got to beta testing stage 3 months after that. So there was a sort of a decision where, at the very last minute, we could have strong-armed the release of this product into GA. But at the final moment, I decided to cancel the rollout because it just wasn't good enough. It didn't scale as it needed to, and it was still having stability issues. And it was deeply humiliating. And it was also not without political consequences. There were serious kind of consequences that came out of this. But it was weird because at the same time that it was kind of externally humiliating, internally I actually, for the first time in my life, was incredibly proud of what I'd done. The Impostor Syndrome was gone. So the irony was very rich. I was sad for my customers, But of all the successes I'd ever had in life, this failure was by far the most impressive to me in my own estimation. And the other thing that happened was we were actually making huge progress. The failure started to open up this unprecedented number of new avenues for me, and much more so than if we had nailed an easier problem. First of all, we learned a huge amount about the space and the issues and the ways of solving it. We did actually deploy an interim solution, which was a strong pivot from our original architecture and was significantly reduced in features, but it was a first definite step towards improvement. It was an iterative improvement, much better than what existed before, and something that no one else had ever been able to do or even attempted. The other thing that I realized was that we were actually becoming experts by failing. We were working on a problem that no one else had solved. And even though I didn't broadcast this out, I started getting calls from Fortune 500 companies saying, could you please join us at 3 levels higher than your current position? We want you guys to solve this problem for us at our company. And unbelievably, I was even offered the opportunity to join the highest rank and be a CEO of my own company, building a generalized solution that others could purchase. And this is something that I never dreamed possible. And so basically this failure had catapulted me faster and higher than any success. So I learned a few secrets that I've sort of employed since then, and I really would like to share with you guys. So imposters don't fail, but authentic people do a lot. So imposters, or people with imposter syndrome, are very careful to aim low, to make sure that everything they do is perfect, make sure that everything done looks great, but they don't learn. And authentic people, or people that don't suffer from imposter syndrome, are willing to lean in and embrace failure as a way to learn. Imposters feel a general sense of unease, but authentic people feel deep terror every day. There's nothing like the burning action of real terror, working on a problem beyond your boundaries, to clear the fog of unease working within your boundaries as an imposter. And so basically, if you don't feel fear on a regular basis, you're not leaning in hard enough, and you're not actually doing what you could. The other thing is that some companies will hold you back, and this is important to realize. Failing has risk in the real world at a lot of companies and a lot of environments, and typically these are the places that are unable to innovate because they will end up failing due to lack of action, rather than being willing to accept failure as a learning process that will enable innovation. And so if you're in an environment right now where you know that failure is definitely going to be unacceptable, you should also know that that place is holding you back, and you should leave. So here's the summary of the 7-step prescription for curing imposter syndrome. Step 1, find a challenge that is beyond what you know you can do. Step 2, commit to it, give it everything you have. Write it down on paper, carry the paper with you, visualize it happening, put a picture symbolizing your end goal somewhere you can see it, work on it every day. Step 3, if you fail, be proud of the great work you did. Step 4, make iterative improvements. Step 5, become an expert. Step 6, see the possibilities of your life bloom in ways you've never imagined before. Step 7, repeat. So I think this talk might be a little bit familiar to some of you guys. You maybe have heard something along these lines somewhere else in your life. So aside from just reiterating this, I'd also like to share some of the tools that I use to deal with the pain that you will experience as you're forging your way up the path to success/failure. So the thing is, you have to not give up. That's the one thing. If you just keep going, you'll be fine. And so how do you do that? Because there will be peaks of pain and emotional turbulence and problems that, minor catastrophes. And so it's really important to be able to take the edge off of those peaks, so that you can kind of soften what you can endure and continue. So one big thing that's really useful is basically finding a support group of people that can kind of, you can talk to, that you can identify with, who can basically, be a support group of some kind or another. I happen to find these people, mindfulness-based achievement. These guys work with professional women, so I highly recommend. They have coaching, they have group sessions, they have online things, but this is just one example of many. There are lots of different ways you can connect with a community of people. Another thing that I do a lot is meditate. And so what I do is breath-based and agnostic. And I started with 5 minutes a day. I went up to 40 minutes. And essentially, it's just a really nice way to take the edge off when you're sort of, feel like you're at sort of your breaking point. The issue with meditation is that it has a serious PR problem. And Dan Harris actually put it really well. I suspect that if the practice could be denuded of all the spiritual preening and straight out of a fortune cookie lingo, such as sacred spaces, divine mother, and holding your emotions with love and tenderness, it would be attractive to many more millions of smart, skeptical, and ambitious people who would never otherwise go near it. It's starting to kind of enter the mainstream now more and more. It's used by people who basically want to perform at their peak, who are working on the boundaries of what they can do and want to take the edge off so that they can continue kind of peacefully. Business leaders, Olympic and professional athletes, artists, military people. So the military is actually using meditation. They started in 1985 with Vietnam vets. They're now using it for post-traumatic stress syndrome for Iraq and Afghanistan vets. And it's also being taught in private military academies. A bunch of corporations are teaching meditation, or at least allowing spaces called quiet spaces or private rooms for meditation. Here's a list of some of the most famous, but there's lots of more who are starting to fund these programs. Notable athletes who use meditation. So meditation really helped me, and then additionally there were sort of byproducts that came out of that I think are also just really practical tools to use to kind of muster the strength to kind of continue through a really difficult project as you're leaning in. And one of those is self-compassion and compassion for others, forgiveness, acceptance. And all these things basically make you more flexible and more able to have breakthroughs and continue and be successful in really chaotic, challenging environments. Another thing that I learned actually, which is sort of counterintuitive, is volunteering and helping others is a surefire way to end your imposter syndrome. I guarantee it. There is nothing like teaching someone who is deeply values your input and your help, who knows less than you or who's less fortunate. It will totally dissolve, all feelings of imposter syndrome, and you'll realize that the world needs you and that this person really is benefiting and that you're doing a good thing. And basically, if you just even take a few hours every month and just find a cause that you're interested in, whatever it is, whether it's teaching or helping build a website or whatever, it'll make a big difference for this imposter syndrome. Okay, so I thought we'd do a short exercise. Huffington would be proud of me right now. She did a similar thing at Dreamforce a few years ago. So basically, just to give you guys a taste of meditation, if nobody has experienced it yet, we can walk through it quickly. Okay. So everybody close your eyes. And take a deep breath. And just try to relax. And if you have thoughts going through your mind, that's totally fine. Try to notice them and just don't get too attached. And a good way to do this is visualize the thoughts like leaves floating down a river. Try to stay focused on your breath. And if you notice that you're getting pulled into a particular thought or feeling, that's totally fine, normal. Just gently draw yourself back to your breath. It's totally normal for your brain to be active and thinking. That's what it does. But we're just practicing not automatically believing what our brain thinks or diving into it. And try to bring your attention back to your breath. In and out. And notice that you can notice your thoughts without actually engaging in them. And notice the strength in this. And just bring yourself back to your breath. And again, if you notice your attention is wandering, that's totally fine. Just practicing observing what's happening versus automatically jumping in. Take 5 more deep breaths. Cool, and everybody open your eyes. So that's basically one way of kind of rebooting your brain, getting some distance and kind of softening the edge of what's going on. Does anybody want to comment on what that was like? Anyone want to share their experience? From what? It might be, yeah, naps are cool too. I definitely recommend naps. I love naps. Cool, so yeah. Anyway, that's one tool that I've used really well. There's other things you can do, like around acceptance, and basically accepting reality, accepting your feelings, and sort of embracing negative feelings, experiencing them and then letting them go. That sort of come along with meditation. I think we'll skip those for now just because we might be running a little bit short. So anyway, these are the things that I've done to kind of successfully feel authentic, whether I fail or succeed, and to help cultivate the strength to pursue goals that I am not sure I can achieve. And to lean in, play beyond the edges of my boundaries. At this point, I do feel a lot of, I'm tired a lot. I get upset, bad things happen, things aren't perfect. But I never feel like I'm tormented by the question of whether or not I deserve my external recognition. That's pretty much gone. So I'm so grateful to be in that place at this point. I feel like I can be my own supporter and take pride in my work. And I feel motivated to continue to learn and fail and grow. So I guess what I'd like to tell you is that it's very possible to cure your imposter syndrome if you have it. And if you do have it, it's your duty to cure it right now, because we have to make this stop. And also help others who have this issue. Engage in in dialogue, be supportive. I think this is just something that we just need to kind of take care of, sort of like, you know, all the other social issues that we've dealt with over the past 50 years here on this planet. Like, this is another one that we just need to resolve. There's a bunch of resources for people who are interested. Other talks, actually I didn't realize this, a lot of other people have been talking about this at other technical conferences, so that's pretty interesting. Books that I recommend. And also feel free to contact me if you want to discuss this more, if you have ideas or comments or questions. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thanks. So actually, I just realized I think I misread the time. So I think we actually do have a little bit of time. If you guys have questions or comments, we can jump into that.
I think I'm okay with this syndrome. If I had it before, I think I got cured completely. And then I think my problem has more to do with my college issues. I thought I think they have this in process. How do I
So I think the question was, like, I personally don't feel like I have this problem, but I know colleagues who do. Like, how can I help them? I think that's a really great question. Basically, you know, I think dialogue helps a lot, like basically openly discussing, like, you know, the issue. It makes a big difference. Being supportive and giving people feedback, like, that's honest, like, you know, you're not taking on enough, like you should take on more. You are like too focused on doing things perfectly. You can make some mistakes, or, you know, this project didn't do well, and that's just the truth. Like, this project is not going well, and that's the truth. Like, dealing with imposter syndrome doesn't mean being, like, you know, like artificially positive about things that aren't good. It's important to be honest. But I think having the dialogue, being supportive, giving supportive feedback, and having the discussion of, you know, you did really well with this project, and the person saying, well, I don't really think I did very well, and sort of trying to help bring them in line with reality, and kind of move their perception into something that's more accurate. All those things can be good ways to help colleagues. But I don't know, does anybody else have suggestions on how to help others? Talking about it, honestly. Find a new job. There's no shortage of jobs, so yeah. Okay.
That people, because they have that, then, you know, people do think of them as, you know, approachable, nice, you know, not cocky, and that actually can contribute to their success. Maybe I'm wrong, but actually, you know, what you describe as people that suffering from imposter syndromes are the kind of people that, are nice to be around, nice to, round ideas by, work with, and so forth.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
I mean, I've definitely heard that from a lot of people that I've talked to. Like, well, I think my imposter syndrome actually helps me because it motivates me to do more and or like, I kind of secretly like my imposter syndrome because, yeah, it sort of maybe gives me an edge or something. And it ensures that I will never fall into the opposite kind of bucket, which I think does exist actually for some people, less common, but where you your perception of what you're doing is way out of line with what you are doing, but like on the positive spectrum. And my take on that is, I don't really believe it because, especially for for women and underrepresented groups, what it translates to most of the time is basically doing less than what you can do for a lot of people, and not leaning in, and not sort of pursuing, the level of work that you really should be and you could be. And so I think that people who have imposter syndrome, have really limited themselves with what they can do, and that's terrible because not just for them actually, but for their company, for their community, for the world. There's a bunch of people who are basically playing low, and that's not helping anyone. We need people to. It doesn't serve anyone, actually, to aim low. It serves everyone to aim high. And, I mean, there are people who have succeeded with it anyway, but think of all the people who haven't succeeded who could have. It's a huge waste. It's a huge loss. And Selenium is about efficiency and not wasting things, so, let's not be wasteful with our talents here.
Denali, as you were saying, this is something that requires introspection and thought on every individual to push yourself and push the boundaries. And I was wondering whether you saw companies try to nudge people in this direction with either cultural shifts or policies or whatever it is, if there's something that a company or a manager can actually help out with.
Thank you for mentioning that, actually, because I forgot that I wanted to basically make this very thinly veiled pitch to you all. So one of the things that I really love about working at Uber is that we have a serious commitment to failure in engineering. We totally believe in failure as a way of succeeding, innovating, learning, to the point where it's one of our cultural mantras, essentially. So what typically ends up happening at Uber is we set really, really aggressive goals that are just completely insane. No one in their right mind would set these, at most companies. And then we completely commit to it. We work our butts off to try and make it happen. We get something out the door, and it usually fails. And then we go through and it's humiliating. I'm not saying failure is a fun thing. It's not fun. But we go through the things that failed, all the bugs, all the issues at every layer. We fix them. We make sure they don't happen again with automated testing and other things in place. And then we do it a second time. And then usually the second time we actually nail it. And it's perfect. And it's in fact better than we could have done if we had taken 6 or 8 months to really carefully plan it out and be really sure that we didn't slip any deadlines and that there were no bad press for some particular director or VP, because they're not concerned about that sort of thing as much. So I think for sure there are companies that cultivate this and companies that don't. In general, larger companies have more of a problem with this, I think, just because of the nature of humans and the way politics work and stuff like that. But I think for smaller companies, I think it's really important to cultivate that if you can, at your startup or your small business, and see failure as a way of learning and perfecting things and becoming an expert. And don't allow people to kind of do any sandbagging or, kind of shying away so that they can make sure that they meet their deadline or whatever. But yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think if you notice at your company, one way or the other, don't stay at companies that are holding you back. Like, don't do it. There's too many great companies out there, too many opportunities, and yeah.
One last question. We got to make it quick.
So just want to ask, how different is it from inferiority complex?
What's that?
How different imposter syndrome is from inferiority complex?
I don't actually know that much about inferiority complex. The question was, what's the difference? That's probably a good question. I'm not sure actually. I haven't done very much research on that. So I think imposter syndrome is sort of a unique thing in that, like, in order to have it by definition, you actually have to be successful, like, externally and have some amount of, like, external achievement. And so that's sort of the focus of imposter syndrome, is like on people that are like otherwise extremely successful, like in their external life, but feel like they're incredibly unsuccessful internally.
I think that's about all the time we've got.
Cool.
Thank you, Denali.
Thanks, guys.